Welcome to the Darkstream. I'm Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com. Infogalactic news, infogalactic tech, and of course, rabid puppies. I'm kind of sick of thinking and talking and writing about politics for the time being, and so I'm going to talk about writing. And specifically, I'm going to talk about a rumor that went out, which was pretty doggone funny. It's not true, of course. But the rumor was going around that Neil Gaiman had been brought in to finish The Winds of Winter and presumably the seventh and final book of A Song of Ice and Fire, because George Martin couldn't do it. And so, what's been interesting, to me to think about, is that it gets more difficult to write once you're beyond a certain age. Now, there's a post on VP. There's actually a post on Blackgate originally, and I linked to it. I think it was back in 2012. And so one of the things that Scott had noted was that most writers have about a 20-year window when they're at their peak in terms of fiction. And what was kind of interesting about it was that in that post, it became pretty obvious that there was no way that Martin really ever had a chance to finish his series while he was at his peak, just because he started the whole thing, published the whole thing, I guess, when he was 46. Kind of ominous for me. I'm older than that now. But if you look at the history. Well, yeah. Actually, it's interesting because if you look at Martin's age and if you look at that series, the book definitely hit its peak somewhere between the end of the first book and the middle of the second book. By the third book, things were already beginning to head downhill, and then of course it all fell apart after that. And so we can safely predict, with a fair degree of confidence, that the next book, when it comes out, is going to suck. It's just not. There's so many problems now that it would have been difficult for Martin to fix it even at his peak. Now, fortunately, he can just rip off the story. He can do fan fiction of his own stuff. Because the story has advanced due to the TV show. So he's basically going to be, the novel is going to be a novelization of his own TV show. So of course, there's no reason to expect much. I'll probably read it. I very much doubt I'll buy it, but publishers usually send me books, so. My book 3 should be fine. I have to actually do the finished version of my book 2 first, but the general consensus is that unlike A Song of Ice and Fire, that A Sea of Skulls is actually better than A Throne of Bones. I think that's correct, and I'm pretty sure that what I'm adding to book 2 is going to be of a similar quality, possibly even better. But what people have to understand is, it's difficult. This is book 0 in the series, Sum Helvetica, and it's basically it's got all the short stories as well as that first novel, Sum Helvetica, and it's 501 pages in print. So that's not too big. It's a decent size. respectable, but not monstrous. But then you get to Throne of Bones. I mean, this is a behemoth. What is it now? 912 pages with the appendices. 899 pages as it's laid out. It takes time to do these things. And, in addition to, it takes time just to write that much stuff. And so to make it good is that much more challenging. It's especially challenging for a writer like me in that I have an awful lot of other distractions. We're developing three or four games right now. I just got asked today to do some design consulting on a friend's game, which I'm going to do just because it's an interesting project. That's the kind of project that I'm probably not going to have the chance to develop on my own. So it's fun to get the chance to sort of see some of my ideas developed by another developer. So there's a lot of different distractions and that sort of thing. Steam Greenlight, I don't know yet. We have a relationship with Good Old Games, and the next game that we're doing is going to be a Game Brain. I don't know if any of you read Dev Game, but I've posted a couple comments on there about it. Game Brain is a trivia game about games, about computer games and video games specifically, and it's a lot of fun. There's a single player mastery mode and a multiplayer competition mode, and it's got a really nice mechanic, a new mechanic that hasn't been seen in trivia games before. And just today, I think we hit 2,500 questions. Trivial Pursuit only had 6,000, but our game is actually more complex in some ways because we have multiple choice as well. So, instead of a total of 6,000 answers, we're already at 10,000 answers to the questions. Of course, most of them are wrong, but it's going to be. I think it's going to be a great game. I think it's going to be. I think it'll be my first hit in a while. So we'll see how it goes. But these things take time, and when I'm writing questions about Lich King or Warlords 2 or Joust, I'm not working on a Sea of Skulls. I'm not working on SJW's Always Double Down, and then you throw in the need to edit other people's books. I mean, what I should be doing right now instead of doing this is I should be wrapping up the final editing on a book that's going to come out on Friday by Kai Chia, which is a really good sort of supernatural MIL SF book that I think is going to be fun. But the whole thing, and that's why it's difficult, I think, for writers, whether it's Martin, whether it's me, who tackle these giant books. I mean, there's a reason why you don't see very many of them, because it's much, much easier to write, short 300-page books, shorter 250-page books, where you can just sort of, wrap the story up very quickly. No, this book is by Kai Chia. He is the author of Titan Strike, which was one of the really good novellas in There Will Be War Volume 10. And so, however, we are doing some work with bonsoir, actually. I guess at this point we're closer to bonne nuit. But the thing that we're working on with Brian, we're going to announce tomorrow, and I think it's going, I think it's going to please a lot of people and surprise a lot of people. But it's a totally new series that Castelia is introducing, and comme ci comme ça. Je préférais le Tempranillo d'Espagne. But the what we're going to what we're going to introduce in is I'll give you a hint. We are going to essentially clone a existing series that is converged, and so we're going to basically take a story and take it in the direction that Brian and I think it should have gone. And so, okay, chill out, Alex. We're aware of that. So I'm going to post an excerpt tomorrow, and I'm going to post an excerpt tomorrow. Talk a little bit about it, let people know it's coming. The book's already done. It just needs to be edited and so forth. But yeah, there's no reason why we need, just because we can't use the brands, just because we can't use the names, doesn't mean that we can't deconverge the stories. I mean, how many times were the tales that are recorded in the Brothers Brothers Grimm told by someone else? So there's no reason why we have to respect the stories and lose the stories that we enjoyed when we were younger, just because the SJWs happen to own the properties. So, so I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, the corroding empire, yeah, it's kind of similar to that sort of thing. Although, in the case of the corroding empire, or corrosion, as we change the name to, I guess corroding empire is the series. So, but yeah, the corroding empire is similar, but it's much more. This is something that's much more conscious in terms of taking an existing story and then continuing it from there. So, so I think that I think it's going to be interesting to see how this works, how it goes. We're not going to infringe any copyrights. We're not going to step on any tails, and we're going to take the story in completely different directions, because whether you're talking about X-Men, whether you're talking about Star Wars, whether you're talking about Star Trek, all of those things have been, or even the comics from Thor and whatever, all of those things have been taken in converged directions by the SJWs who now control them. We don't need to, it's my belief that we don't need to leave it to them. So, but getting back to the writing, it's interesting. If you look up that post on VP, just do a search for Martin and Fastball, and if you scroll down a little bit, you should be able to find it. I think the guy who had written the piece at Blackgate's name was Scott. I don't remember his last name, but it was really interesting to see the ages of the various authors concerning when they were at their peak and when they lost their fastball. I think the oldest writer of any note who was still writing effectively was Asimov, who wrote till he was 65. Before him was Tolkien, who wrote until he was 57, wrote effectively till he was 57. It's really remarkable sometimes, though. Yeah, Tom Wolfe is another good example. But it's really remarkable when you see the authors when they just go off the deep end, when they just lose it. For me, it was a real shock reading Colleen McCullough. I liked her First Man in Rome series, and I think it was the October Horse where it was either that or something like the Ladies of Rome or something like that. But I mean, it was like reading a different author. a different story. Well, Van Creveld, I think it's a little different for historians and stuff. For historians, it's not necessarily about output, the ability to output, although obviously that can factor in. I think it's mostly about focus. I've noticed that as I have more responsibilities, as I have more things going on, my ability to focus on one thing to the exclusion of all else is somewhat reduced. When I was in my, I was actually doing some questions on Wing Commander today, Wing Commander and Wing Commander 2. And man, I remember coming home from work and basically playing that until 2 in the morning. Just without even thinking twice about it. Or, my best friend and I would get together and play Warlords, or before that, Wizardry. And, we wouldn't think twice. I mean, you'd sit down and you'd play for 6 hours. You wouldn't think twice about it. Now, whether it's games, whether it's reading, any of those things, it's a bit difficult to do that. So, like for example, I was hoping to have SJW's Always Double Down done already. And I've got plenty of notes, and frankly, it's a little difficult because the left keeps giving new examples every day that you can use. But whereas I turned out the original in 5 weeks, I've done, I think I'm just nowhere near done with SJW Always Doubles Down, and it's really irritating because I know a lot of people are waiting for it. And I know that it's something that people can use. But, like tonight, tonight I just ended up, starting on I wrapped up last night I wrapped up a chapter on A Sea of Skulls. And then I started on a new chapter last night. So, and I have to admit, I'm quite enjoying the Thuderic stuff. It's kind of fun to get the chance to, do my detailed battle scenes, but from the perspective of, the Royal Battle Mage rather than a commander. So it's a different perspective. It's of interest to me. And some things are just more challenging to write than others, and also it's much tougher to write a follow-up book, especially when the first book has been successful. I found it the same way with A Sea of Skulls. I found it very difficult to get going on that because you feel this pressure to make sure that it's as good as the first one. But you don't necessarily have a great grasp on what is good about the first one. And so, pretty much everything that you do on the second one, you just start kind of doubting yourself and wondering whether, okay, is this really what I'm going to commit to? And that sort of doubt and questioning really disrupts your ability to focus. So anyhow, that's just, like I said, I'm just kind of meandering and musing about writing a bit. Fortunately, I clearly, even if I started peaking in 2012, that theoretically gives me, another 15 years to be at my peak, so we'll see. Do the fantasy books reflect my political opinions? Not really. I don't really have, there are certainly elements, I think, that come through. Just because I try to let the events in the story dictate the plot. I don't write outlines. I realize that sounds absurd considering I write 900-page novels, but I really do write them just freeform. And so a lot of the events that take place. So for example, the decadence of the elves and the fact that the elves they tend to be long-lived and they don't tend to be very numerous. Well, there has to be an explanation for that, a rational and reasonable explanation for that. And so that's where my perspective is going to come into the story. That doesn't mean that I'm making a political point. I'm not. But the way that I think about things is going to affect how I come up with the answers explaining those situations. But I'm not taking the situation, creating the situation in order to make a political statement about that. I just don't do that. I'm not interested in doing that. I don't think that helps the story. And in fact, one of my goals with writing A Throne of Bones in the first place was to get completely away from the idea of subtexts and messages and all that sort of thing. I wanted to focus only on the story. And I believe that with the first book, it's got a good, strong basis for that. And so then, as the second and third books come out, I can't really stray away from that very easily. So I already do political writing, and if I want to write something political, I'll publish a nonfiction book. I published Cuckservative. I published SJWs. I'm working on SJWs. I always double down. I don't have any, unlike somebody who's just a fiction writer, I have no need or desire to work politics into my fiction. If you look at that chart, it seems that most writers don't really hit much of a stride until they're 40. Whenever you see these debut novelists who make so much noise, whether it's Bret Easton Ellis or Jay McInerney or whoever, they almost never follow it up. And I was wondering about that, and I think I figured out why that is. And if you look at their books that have been very successful, like, say, Bright Lights, Big City, that's a guy writing about himself. He's not actually telling a story. He's telling a story, but he's basically telling a story that is a variant of his own autobiography. And it's much easier, if you've lived a sufficiently interesting life, then you've got something to write about. You've got a good story. But that doesn't mean that you're good at creating a good story. That doesn't mean that you're good at inventing a decent story. It doesn't mean that you're capable of telling a new story. And so, anyhow, I think that's the problem when you see these guys come in and do that. Someone like William Gibson, he came in pretty strong, but he's even his successful novels were basically like collections of short stories strung together. And so, I've read a couple of his novels. I've enjoyed his novels, but they're not great. They're okay. And so, I think even in the case of somebody who's been fairly successful, fairly young like him, he's just not at that. He's not at that level of what you'd call a great or even particularly noteworthy author. Someone like Umberto Eco, who didn't write his debut novel until I think he was 50 or so. That kind of makes a little bit more sense. You need to have more experience. It's kind of funny because you see these young authors. I don't understand that question. We already have lots of audiobooks out. So, if you go to the blog and look on the left sidebar, there's a link that says audiobooks. If you click on it, then you'll see a fair number of them. You got to keep in mind it's a little tough. The reason you haven't seen much of my fiction, especially the Throne of Bones, Selenoth stuff, is because it's really hard to find somebody that's going to, do 40 hours of audio for a single book. We do have a guy working on it. He's working his way through Summa Helvetica and the various short stories right now. So Summa Helvetica will be the first one to come out, along with all the collected novellas and whatnot. And then if he still wants to do it, he'll do A Throne of Bones and do A Sea of Skulls. So, anyhow, any questions before I roll here? I got a couple minutes. Then I'll make myself get back to editing. Yeah, Cuckservative and SJW's Always Lie are both in audio. That's true. And actually, Quantum Mortis is almost done. I think we've got, we're going to put Gravity Kills and A Man Disrupted out together. Or maybe, I'm not sure which one's being finished. Yeah, actually that's right. A Man Disrupted and Gravity Kills are coming out together, and then we have a great female voice who's going to do a mind program. So, Winter is Warning apparently was the post that was mentioned before. So, anyhow, well, that's all I had. So I should probably get back to work here. So have a good evening. Thanks for stopping by. I'm glad we were able to get together and talk about something that didn't involve anything particularly serious. So have a good evening, and we'll see you soon.